Speaker.
The Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, we heard from the last speaker that New Zealand's doing well from the far north to the far south. From the north to the south. Well, from the north to the south, people are losing jobs. From the north to Bluff. Today on the west coast, another 200 people. 160,000 people seeking jobs. 170,000 people under this government having left for Australia after the National in their election promise in 2008 ran on the slogan, "Say goodbye to higher taxes, not your loved ones." Since then, more people have moved to Australia than is the combined population of Dunedin and Invercargill, if you want a South Island comparison. More people than live in Hamilton, if you want a North Island comparison. And yet this bill does nothing substantial to change the economic fortunes of our country. Mr Speaker, what could this bill have done? Well, this is the annual tax rates remedial legislation bill. It could have done something substantial, but of course you never get that from a national government. All national governments have ever done through history, and this government is no different, this national government, is they trim government expenditure, and that is appropriate, we're not arguing against that. Trimming government expenditure to get back to budget surplus is an important thing to do. And they deal with labour laws in the way they think fit, which is always to reduce wages. Other than that, national governments never embark upon substantial economic reform. Never. They are conservatives. And conservatives around the world trim expenditure, cut back labour laws and do nothing else. It is always the progressive side of politics around the world, whether it's in New Zealand or in Australia or Great Britain, that pull the levers that change the economy. And if you look back at the history of New Zealand, when New Zealand's been in the doldrums, it has been progressive parties that have come in and made the fundamental changes that were necessary to the New Zealand economy. That was true following the Great Depression. What did the national government do in relation to the reforms of the then Labour governments following the Great Depression? They followed them. We then got into a period of stagnation under Mr Muldoon, and it was a progressive Labour government that made the case for change and changed New Zealand's economy fundamentally for the better. What did National do following that? Well, what they always do, they attack labour relations, they didn't change economic settings, they cut government expenditure a little bit, but they did nothing substantial to alter the shape of the economy. Here we are again, global financial crisis, greatest recession that the world has faced since the Great Depression in the following World War II, in the 1930s. And what's the national government doing? Very little. What's happened to New Zealand? Well, slowly we're getting back towards budget surplus. That's the government's part of the equation. But New Zealand is getting poorer every year because we have a balance of payments deficit that is already second worst in the developed world after Greece. Second worst in the developed world after Greece. Last year it was $10 billion alone. That $10 billion hole was plugged through more borrowing from overseas and the sale of assets. And what's the government's plan for this year, three-year cycle? Their big plan for this three-year cycle is to sell what already exists, to privatise our already profitable and successful power companies. What you do when you don't have a plan. And even that has gone amiss. What was their plan for their last three-year term? Mining and national parks. Look where that lies. What's been the big centrepiece of the budget this year? Increasing student performance through larger class sizes. We are so bereft of vision, and this bill amplifies the point. I see Dr Smith there. Dr Smith, I actually think Dr Smith has a good environmental ethic. I think he actually wants to make a difference to the environment. What's the measure that we have in New Zealand to control the growth in our emissions under this national government? It's meant to be through pricing emissions to create an economic incentive for people to go green rather than pollute more. In this bill, we have changes to emission units law relating to forestry. The last bill we heard reduces the carbon price in New Zealand to 50 cents a tonne. As Brian Fellows estimated today, for a major emitter, if they had $1 million of turnover, their emissions cost would be $200. $200. A fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. How can you rely on a price to alter behaviour if the price is meaningless? Mr. Speaker, what else could be done here? Well, the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, the New Zealand Treasury, the Reserve Bank, the Labour Party, the Greens, just about every other Western country in the world, virtually all of the economists in New Zealand, say people should be investing in our economy on the basis of the profitability of an investment, not because of a tax bias. In New Zealand at the moment, we lament the fact that we've got this enormous trade deficit and current account deficit, both, and the current government refuses to pull the levers that will fix that, including to bring forward some pro-growth tax reform, either through an R&D tax credit or through a capital gains tax. And the most important of those two is a capital gains tax, so that people invest on the basis of the profitability of an enterprise rather than a tax bias driving too much investment into the speculative economy. It's not just the Labour Party saying that. It's not just the history of 30 years of current account surplus because we speculate too much in houses and don't invest enough in our productive export or import substitution businesses. It's the IMF, the OECD, the Treasury and the Reserve Bank, and yet it is not in this bill and the government has put it off limits. What else is not in this bill? Mr. Speaker, KiwiSaver. We heard the National Party talking about KiwiSaver. Actually, it wasn't their policy, it was a Labour Party policy. I think the budgets that introduced it were opposed by National, from memory. Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that the biggest difference economically, or I believe the biggest difference economically between New Zealand and Australia and their increasing rate of earnings compared with New Zealand over the years is not mining. It's not mining. Those gaps in earnings arose when mining was in the doldrums. Those gaps arise because they invest more in their productive enterprises, whether it's in mining or in other parts of the economy. And they do that because they save more. Their KiwiSaver equivalent is compulsory for everyone in the workforce except for the self-employed and the occasional exception for hardship. That's what the Labour Party proposes for New Zealand. What did this bill do? As Dr. David Clark says, it reverses their earlier reversal. Previously, they reduced the rate of contribution to KiwiSaver. Now they're increasing it again to 3+3, but still they have not grasped the big nettle, which is making it universal. Mr. Speaker, we heard the last speaker say that the average number of enrolments to KiwiSaver was so many thousand per month. What a misleading use of statistics. Just in the last week, it has been announced that the rate of new sign-ups to KiwiSaver is dropping very substantially, and it will not increase again until we have a stronger economy under a government led by other than this backward-looking National Party, and until we have a universal KiwiSaver scheme. Mr. Speaker, let's also reflect on what this tax bill doesn't do. It doesn't reverse the increasing inequality that we have in New Zealand. Whether it's income inequality or asset inequality, it's going up under this government. It's going up in part because 40% of their income tax cuts went to the top 10% of income earners. This bill does nothing to reverse that. The latest issue of The Economist magazine says there's a need for more progressivism in the world because of rising asset and income inequality in the world. New Zealand has had a higher rate of increase in inequality in recent years than America. We started from a better place, and therefore we're not yet as unequal as America, but we're heading in that direction because of policies brought forward from this national government, which gave 40% of their income tax cuts to the top 10%. We had the audacity of the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, to turn up in the House this week and say that average after-tax incomes had gone up. Well, that's true, but only if you include that top 10%. For more than half of all New Zealanders, real incomes are down. Real incomes are down. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a missed opportunity. It only tinkers.
Call Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on the tax